The family owns property up and down. What can you tell me about the Stills family? Rachel asked. I only know bits and pieces.
Hey Dennis, how are you?
Good, Grant. How you doing today?
Doing good. Doing good.
Where are you, in Greensboro?
No, I'm back in Wake Forest right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I couldn't remember where it was, if it was Greensboro or Wake Forest. So are you
Yeah.
at home? Is that where you live?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So
Okay,
I'm from like the Wake Forest, Raleigh area.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I get to move into my new apartment Sunday. So
Oh, great.
count down the seconds, not gonna lie, but um I'm excited to get the new year.
Where is the apartment?
So it's in Greenville. It's right across from the student center.
Oh, wow.
So it's like the Province. I'm not sure if you know the names, but
I know there's one on the corner that's pretty big. I can't remember the name of it. I know that Brady lived there last year.
I think that's the proximity. So I'm like
Yeah.
right next to that pretty much.
Okay.
It's
Okay,
just fancier than mine, but um
cool.
yeah, I'm excited.
That's great. Do you have a lot of stuff to move?
Not really, honestly. I mean a little bit. It comes furnished, which is nice. So
Oh, wow.
um
I want to be a student again, man. Although
yeah.
when I was a student, furnish was not a thing.
Oh really?
My God,
Yeah.
we lived like I don't know how to describe it. Pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
For us, usually it's if you want to live in a house, you have to bring your own furniture, but other than that, it's usually furnished.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think you guys pay a lot more in rent than we did. I had a house at JMU when I was a kid, when I was a student. I'm trying to remember. I think it was I think it was 3-bedroom house. And I think the total rent was $300 a month.
oh my God.
Yeah,
Nice.
divided like a million ways. We had people living everywhere.
Oh yeah. Crush on the couch.
I actually had a guy live in the attic.
Oh my God.
And one night he fell through my bedroom ceiling onto the floor, but through the ceiling from the attic.
Oh my God.
Oh, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's
all
wild.
right. Well, I guess we'll get started here. Hey, everybody, how's everyone doing today?
Doing great, Dennis.
All right. Hey, John, glad to see is that your granddaughter that's doing better?
Now my wife.
Oh, your wife. I saw a picture of a little baby. What was that?
Oh, that's my wife's cousin's granddaughter.
Okay. So it's your wife that's having problems. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, she's been battling stage 4 cancer for 9 years now.
9 years. That's phenomenal.
Yes, it is.
Oh, so sorry. Jeez. You know what I heard, John? Somebody once told me old age is not for sissies.
That sure isn't.
Oh, God. All right. Well, I'm going to share my screen here and we're going to get started here. So as some of you know, we've mentioned before, I think that we're very fortunate to have Techstars curriculum that's given to us, or they let us use it more accurately. So today we're going to do something that you may not be real familiar with, but I think it's going to be helpful, and it's the concept of category design, specifically with the intention of you defining the category that you're in and making yourself the leader in that category. It's a strategy thing. It's something that you may not have been introduced before. So I'm hoping that that you'll find this helpful. And please, if you have any questions, just interject and I can pause the videos. Like a lot of these, there is a series of videos and there's also exercises that you can do. And this is in our member resources on our website under Techstars. So you can do these exercises for those that would like to do that. So let's become a category king or queen.
So I want to walk you through the basic ideas about what category design is all about and how to think that way and how to take your company in that direction if that's something you want to do. So this is basically an overview, but some behind the scenes stuff about the book too. Just want to start out with a few reasons why it's important to think this way. And so one is everybody in this room probably knows and feels that it's way easier to start a company today than it was 20 years ago. Grab a laptop and a credit card, get on AWS, join up with somebody like Techstars. A couple people can have a company up and running in no time that can compete with the giants of the world. But what that means is that if anybody has a really interesting idea in an interesting new space, it quickly looks like this, with 1,000 other companies piling in to do what you're already trying to do. So it becomes really hard to stand out unless you are establish yourselves as some kind of a leader, a thought leader, a category king in a particular space. And another reason to try to go for this idea of category king and category creation is that in any market that's really that's digital, it's a winner take all kind of situation. And you can measure that any way you want. Market share, you look at on-demand transportation, and Uber is the obvious category king in this space. It takes 73% of the market share, Lyft 23%. And so market value is another way you could measure it, and Airbnb in particular space worth 30-some billion dollars. When HomeAway was sold, it was worth about $4 billion. Whether it's, you measure it by total usage, in the space of online storage, Dropbox kind of identified the category and came to dominate it. And even with all of Google's power and capabilities, it still only has 70% of the usage of this kind of online storage space. And another interesting reason for wanting to be a category king is the category kings tend to attract the best people. And here's a way we know about this. About a year ago, LinkedIn decided to do a study using its data to try to figure out what were the 25 companies that the most talented people in the world want to work for. And when a little background story on this, when LinkedIn wanted to do this study, they ran the data, but they also brought in a woman named Susie Welch to analyze the data and write about it. Now, Susie Welch is a pretty famous business journalist. She used to be the editor of Harvard Business Review. She also happens to be married to Jack Welch, who was the former CEO of General Electric and also kind of a business character in his own right. And so we didn't even really know about this project. And then one of my co-authors, Al Ramadan, got a call one day from Susie Welch saying, we're doing this study, and I happen to have been reading your book. And I noticed that if you map the companies that are landing on that list of the ones people want to work for to the idea of category kings, most of the companies on the list are identifiably category kings. And she wanted to talk to us about like the dynamics and why that was. But towards the end of the interview, Al thought he'd ask, he says to Susie, well, how did you end up running across our book? And this was one of my favorite things I ever heard about the book was she said, well, my husband's Jack Welch. And I was like, yeah, I know who Jack Welch is. And she said, well, Jeff Bezos gave your book to my husband and said, you should read this. And then my husband gave it to me and said, you should read this. So that's apparently we're floating around in some pretty high, stratospheric circles there. But the bottom line here is that is also a really good reason to want to identify yourself as this category king. So I wanted to walk you back a little bit because this is not something that was just based on like anecdotal evidence or just our particular instincts. When we started this project, we really wanted to back it up with some real data and background information. I'll walk you through this crazy chart here. We took data from thousands of venture-backed companies and just ran it and asked a whole lot of questions of this data and trying to just see what kind of patterns we could get out of it. And we ran across this one thing that we thought was kind of interesting, but we didn't quite know what it meant, but we'll get to that in a second. But what this ends up showing is that when we looked at the value created by venture-backed companies after they went public, post-IPO value, we noticed this pattern that if companies that went public before they were 6 years old, the trend line basically had them dropping in value from IPO time to after the post-IPO value tended to go negative. Companies that went public between 6 and 10 years old created enormous post-IPO value. And companies that went public after they were 10 years old tended to basically flatline. Didn't really lose value, they didn't really excite anybody either. And we wondered what this meant. We took it to places like Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan, the investment bankers there, and we said, we showed them this, and they said, this matches our instincts. This matches what we see. We never ran the data, but actually it's really interesting that, this kind of proves out, but kind of makes sense to us. But they didn't know why this was happening either. So we went searching, and we ran the next step when we asked why this was happening. Oh, by the way, yeah, here's just as a little reminder of that 6 to 10, some of the biggest successes. Facebook went public at 8 years, Amazon at 8 years, Salesforce at 6. Uber in 2018 is 9 years old, so it suggests that if they go public in a year and a half, just don't buy the stock. So we asked, why is this happening? And that led us to the work of an economist named Paul Gurowski. And Paul Gurowski studied category life cycles. And he ended up creating this very simple chart that has 2 steps to it, and I'll walk you through each one. So the first step is and this makes intuitive sense if you think about it. When a new category gets identified, and you're down here basically, and one company or 2 companies figure out that there's some new invention, some new cool thing to do. There's hardly any companies in a space. As soon as, think back to that chart with like a zillion companies on it, as soon as it starts to be identified that it's interesting space, zillions of companies jump in, right? You get this spike in the number of companies in the space, and then you get this time period when the number of companies starts to drop off because 1 or 2 kings solidify. They either acquire some of the other companies in the space or the other companies go out of business. And so the number of companies in that category starts to fall into a smaller number. And then over time, it kind of flatlines. It kind of stabilizes at a few companies that are dominating that space. The other half of the curve goes like this, which is when a category is created, obviously it's worth pretty much nothing. And it takes a while for people to get the idea and it start to have some real value to that category. And then all of a sudden it catches on and it spikes. The total value of that category starts to spike. And over time it matures and levels off. So Gorosky put these together and created this chart of what a category life cycle looks like. And as you can imagine, the value is still climbing. The number of companies pile in, even though the value is not there. Suddenly the category catches on, king emerges, and it consolidates. But the category is actually taking off now and spiking. And then you get to some place where there's 2 or 3 companies dominating, and the category is pretty much mature and flatlining. And as you can probably tell, when you look at that chart and you say, well, that kind of overlaps to this. And it makes some sense because in this particular phase, the category is very uncertain and who's going to be the king is very uncertain. So you get situations like Groupon going public when it was 3 years old, and you've got a category that looked really promising but ended up not being so promising, and a company that went public at a huge valuation and ended up tanking afterwards. In this particular time period, you end up with 1 or 2 companies emerging that seem like they're going to be the obvious kings of this spiking category, and investors are very excited. That's when you want to put money in a company, and so the value starts to climb because it's got a lot of upside. And then in this last phase over here, what tends to happen is that as the category sort of matures and flatlines and the number of players consolidates, it's all of the excitement is out of it. It's just basically a mature stock at play at that point. So that's why when companies go public when they're late, it doesn't do bad, it doesn't do good. It's just that all of the information is already there, right? You're not really investing in something that's going to spike. So we still, we're asking the question of, but why is that happening? Why do those time frames make sense? And that led us to brain science, of all things. And I had a role in this because this is a book that I wrote, came out in 2011, that was about the intersection of brain science and computer science and how those two fields were learning from each other. And by doing this book, it plugged me into the neuroscience community. And of course, we were big fans of Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is all about our brains and how they work and the biases that we have inside of our brains. And so I took the data and the research we had done to a few of my neuroscience friends and said, what does this mean to you? How does this map to anything that you understand? And they said, absolutely, it does. And they started talking to us about the cognitive biases in our brains. And cognitive biases are these things in our brains that make us make decisions that are not based on logic. We actually don't make decisions based on facts. We make decisions based on these biases that get embedded in our brains. And there's some 50 of them. One is the choice supportive bias, which just means that if you buy a particular product, you tend to think it's the best product because you were so smart because you bought it. It's just out of a flywheel that goes around. And groupthink is what it sounds like. We tend to be influenced by what people think around us. And these biases influence our decisions in a very, very meaningful way. So there's another aspect of things that the neuroscience are talking to us about, and this leads us back to some of the category conversation, that when there's too much choice, when there's a lot of stuff out there, our brains categorize things. And that's why, for instance, when you go in the grocery store, it's not arranged alphabetically. It's arranged by categories, because that's how you think. And you want to go in and you want to find the spaghetti sauce, and you go to the aisle where the spaghetti sauce is, and then you make the choice out of a bunch of things that are on the shelf. Interestingly, in business, a line item on a budget is essentially a category. And that's how, again, we think when we run a company. We need, I know I need some public relations, for my company. And then you think, what's the company that's the most, the dominant one, or the one that, is most important for me to engage in that category. So a winning category strategy actually creates a new line item. If you're a B2B company, creates a new line item on somebody's budget. And so when we create these categories in our minds, and our biases tend to put one or two category kings in that space. When you go to the spaghetti sauce aisle, you probably think there's a spaghetti sauce that you think is the best one or the best value for you to buy, and it's already in your brain. You're not going to go there every time and stare at every one and read the ingredients and look at the prices and decide which one to buy. And here's some, just some categories that are, we pretty obviously have category kings in, and they establish themselves in our minds as those kings. And so once we have those, established as those winners in categories, those biases tend to keep them there. So what that all comes back to is the idea that if you're the CEO of a company, one of your jobs is to actually exploit these brain shortcuts. It's actually to condition our minds and make us have those biases in our brains, and so that you can be seen as this category king and embed people in people's brains. And the back end of this that we got from as we talked to the neuroscience folks, is that it takes sustained effort. It's not something that happens with one TV commercial on a Super Bowl. It happens by over and over emphasizing that particular product and that brand and in convincing people that space exists and that you're the king in it. And if you think of the bell curve of the population, you're going to capture some of those early adopters, in those first couple of years. But what happens is that to get to the heart and the meat of the bell curve of what you're trying to influence actually takes that sustained effort over some 6 to 10 years. And that's why we end up with these kinds of time frames that tend to work for any industry, any consumer products, business to business products. It seems to be, this is how fast the majority of people's minds can move.
I just want to take a second here just to talk about a couple things. So I realized that his examples, things like Dropbox and other big companies maybe don't seem that relatable to your situation. But actually, I think it does, if you really stop and think about it a little bit. What's to stop you from defining your business as a new category, or maybe in a category that you hadn't thought of before? For example, some of you are members of the North Carolina Specialty Food Association, and specialty foods across the country are kind of a known thing. If you tell somebody about a specialized food, they're going to automatically think it's some kind of special product, service, spice, seasonings, other things, specialty. What is wrong with you being considered the #1 North Carolina specialty food? Why not? Why can't you be the category leader and the category standard? I've never seen anybody other than maybe including the logo of the North Carolina Specialty Food Association or some other logo like Got to Be NC Marketing. Generally, as far as it goes, is there's some kind of logo somewhere. But what if you were to characterize yourself or your brand or your product as the leader in the North Carolina Specialty Foods? Create the category, take ownership, take leadership, be the thought leader in it. It seems kind of crazy, if you really think about it, but at the same time, it's an opportunity to define your business and even define the discussion over what you're doing. The example this guy just gave was, the grocery store, where you go in and the grocery store is essentially categorized. But I would argue that we're dealing with an infinite grocery store or an infinite aisle. You may have heard that term before. When you're dealing with virtual or online, it isn't the same thing, right? You're not going into a store. You're not looking in a finite space with categories that someone else has created. You're actually free to create your own space, your own category, and make it weird. Make it North Carolina Specialty Food or, some other categorization that you fit in with your business that no one else, can really argue with. It isn't a matter of, as the guy said, it's not about facts. It's about bias. It's about impression. It's about the way human beings think and the order that they think. So to the extent that you can create these biases in your favor, and you can exploit these biases to the benefit, think about the category that you might be able to create for your product. And it may be a very tiny little niche category. I don't care. It's something that people can understand. We're the #1 North Carolina specialty food producer in the state. What does that mean? I don't know. And maybe I'm being too liberal on my definitions, but I think you get the point I'm trying to make. And that is, don't hesitate to figure out a category that you're in and then work to create that category so that you really can stand out. So let me go back to sharing and
So as a CEO or a company founder, I mean, basically, what it comes down to is maybe your most important job is to condition people's brains. This is Steve Jobs conditioning our brains. And when he got up on stage, this is classic Steve Jobs, when he got up on stage to introduce the iPad, he literally got up and he said, "We are creating a new category of product." And he said, we have this new age of digital media. We consume this digital media. The phone is too small. The screen's too small to really enjoy, video and things like that. The laptop's too big. It's too clunky. You can't really sit on your couch and lounge and do it. And so we're going to introduce this new category of product that's made for our times. It's this thing called the tablet, and our product is called the iPad. And he established the idea. We didn't know we even had that problem before Steve Jobs got up on stage and said, you have this problem. And then we all go, oh yeah, actually I do have that problem. I would like to have something like that. And by identifying the category and identifying the problem, he convinced us that he had the solution because he was the only one that was smart enough to figure it out. And we go, yeah, no, I guess I do need an iPad. I'll go out and buy one, $400, great. Importantly, though, the idea is, if you think even of the Steve Jobs example, when you think about category, it's not just about the message. It's actually about what you do. It's the strategy of your company. And it informs everything about your company. And we use this chart. This is in the book. And let me explain. So, as many of you probably know very well, right? When a company starts, it basically starts with product design. It's a couple of people have a good idea. We can build this thing, or we see this opportunity, and you go and you build a product, and that's what you're focused on, creating this cool new thing. And then usually the second thing that happens is, okay, I've got this cool new thing that I've created. Now I need a company to build it, sell it, do all those things that a company does. And you start thinking about what kind of company do I want to have? Where do I want to put it? What kind of people do I want to have in it? What's the logo look like? All those things are designing your company. Now, I would guess that most of you and most people who ever start a company basically stop there. Got a product, we got a company, go. And what we found when we studied all of these companies was that the companies that really succeed and really blow it out have a third thing that they think about. And they think about the space they're going into and how to influence it and how to create it and how to develop that category in people's minds. And by seeing the space, by understanding what the space is and what the problem is they're going to solve, it actually comes back and influences all these other things. Because when you see this very clearly, it helps tell you what kind of product to build. And when you see this space very clearly, it helps tell you what kind of company to build. But also, it's a constant motion, because whatever the product you've built and the company you've built help influence what the category is that you're looking at. But all of these pieces need to go together to help you to have a really forward-thinking company strategy. So if you want to do this, how do you start to think this way? The idea of looking for what's missing. And that's, if you're looking at a market and it's already there and you're saying, well, that looks like a big market. This whole idea that has been around for a long time of, oh, that's a big opportunity. There's space for, several winners in that particular space. That's just total bull. It's just not. It's not true in digital markets, because we go back to, in digital markets, winners tend to take all. And so what you want to do is you want to look for a space that's new and that's missing. This is what Airbnb did when they got started. If you think about the story of Airbnb, these two guys in San Francisco had an apartment, a couple of designers, and there was a conference in town that all the hotels were sold out. And they thought, they didn't have much money. They thought, well, hey, we could blow up a couple of air mattresses, put them on the floor, and serve Captain Crunch in the morning, and put this on Craigslist, and maybe we'll get a couple people that would want to, rent this from them. It worked. They quickly realized they thought this, and actually the whole company in the beginning was geared towards the idea of creating space when there were big conferences in town, in any particular town. But they realized that there was this missing thing of how do you have these sort of short-term opportunities to rent a place when hotels don't work and you don't want to have a long-term rental on something like HomeAway. And they constantly saw a bigger and bigger missing as they went. But this was a new space that they created. In fact, at one point, I was at this big business conference and sat next to the CEO of Marriott, and I turned to him and I said, well, you guys must really hate Airbnb, don't you? And he surprised me, and he said, no, we don't hate them all. We don't even feel like we compete with them. He said, we hate like Expedia and Travelocity because they take their fees take a portion of our revenue, but these guys, we don't care, because they see it as a completely different space.
I'm just going to do one more, and then we'll talk.
Another way to think is to think different, not just better. If you're entering a space, a market space, with the idea of, well, okay, I see that company is doing this already, and we can go in there and just do it a little bit better, that's a way to have to claw for market share, not a way to really blow it out as a category king. And so thinking about things, you want to be seen as something that's different, not just better. And this has been going on, in history forever in business. And you're laughing. You had one of these? Your family? So this is the Chrysler minivan, right? The little background story on the Chrysler minivan. 1980s, And Chrysler was going bankrupt. This was the time when Japanese cars were on the rise and killing all the US car makers. And Chrysler was suffering the worst. Its back was against the wall. And the leadership at Chrysler, Lee Iacocca was the CEO at the time, was looking at demographic information and realizing that all these baby boomers, the surge in the population, were having all these kids. So there was a big boom in families. And at the time, there were basically two choices if you had a bunch of kids. You could either buy a station wagon, which was just kind of a long car and didn't have as much room as maybe you'd need, or you could buy a regular big old van, which didn't fit in your garage because it was too tall. And so they said, well, can we design a car that's built for, families can hold 4 or 5 kids and fit in the garage and appeal to that particular market? And they came up with this thing called a minivan. Importantly, think about category, right? They created a category of minivan, not a product called the minivan. They created a product called the Plymouth Voyager and the Dodge Caravan, but they established in our minds that you have a family, man, you need a minivan. And then if you need a minivan, then the next thought is, well, who makes the minivan, or who invented this thing? Well, it's Plymouth and Dodge, and those are the people to go to. So this thing basically saved Chrysler in the 1980s. And it saved it by thinking differently from anybody else in the car market. And by the way, category king status is a long-term thing, because you think about the whole thing about biases in our brains, you establish that bias and it's hard to take away. And it's, what is it, like 40 years later, and Chrysler still owns 50% of the global minivan market. And this was one of my favorites. This is our takeaway from a couple of our favorite Silicon Valley VCs, who said their favorite kind of market is a $0 billion market. And a $0 billion market is a huge opportunity that only you can see. And you have to, and it takes a whole lot of faith and guts, because you have to be able to believe in it, even if others don't. And you have to be able to go and convince investors and convince customers that thing actually exists. But if it's a $0 billion market, you don't have anybody else chasing you yet, because you're imagining this thing from the ground up. And so if you're not if you can't look and say, I'm creating a $0 billion market, you're probably on a path you need to think about. Here are a couple of $0 billion markets, by the way. I have a personal story about AWS. I think it seems to be constantly circling back to Jeff Bezos, but as a journalist, I had interviewed him many times from the time they were a small company. And I was 2006. I was at a technology conference in San Francisco, wandering around the floor. I get a ring on my cell phone, and it's the PR person from Amazon who says, can you come up to suite, whatever it was, and Jeff Bezos wants to talk to you. And of course I said, great, I'll be there. And hopped in the elevator, went up. And so I see Bezos, and we sit down, and he says, I want to tell you about something we're thinking of doing at Amazon. And he describes this whole thing about renting our computing power by the SIP. That was the term he used at the time. And this was a very strange concept. I mean, nobody had done anything like this. And so he's explaining all of this to me, and started stumbling over it for a long time, and he kind of finished, and I looked at him and I said, well, so how are you ever going to explain this to the public? And he said, what do you think I called you up here for? And he seriously was looking for me to write about it in a way that would help him figure out how to talk about it later. But I tell that story in part because he had no idea what AWS was going to become at the time. It was truly a $0 billion market at the time, and he just was throwing it against the wall to try to see if he could create this thing that had never existed before. And similarly, by the way, for this whole 5-hour energy, I mean, it's not just about technology, right? I mean, the guy who started 5-hour energy was wandering around a health food convention. He saw that there were all these energy drinks that were sold, big cans of liquid, and they were being sold in the refrigerator next to Coke and Pepsi and all these other kinds of things. And he goes, well, he's walking around, he's going, well, you know, okay, I'm tired, I need a boost, but I'm not thirsty, I don't want to drink all this stuff. There's got to be a better way. And he created the idea of the energy shot, and in fact, made sure that it was something that was shelf stable so that it didn't have to be sold in a refrigerator next to other drinks. He sold it by the cash register. So it looks like an entirely different category of product. It's not a drink, it's an energy shot. And 5 Hour Energy now is a $5 billion business. So, you know, $0 billion market, think different, find what's missing.
Pretty cool stuff. I hope that you all are getting a sense of how you might be able to create a category or even think differently about a category that it's just a kind of a different way of thinking. Any feedback from you all at this point? Somebody's in the chat. Okay. All right. John, what's your reaction? You posted something in the chat, so I'll pick on you.
Not a problem. Yeah, I can see the points that he was making fitting very well for us. It's something that we've actually been talking about. We're basically, with the exception of maybe a couple of companies that I'm not too familiar with, we're basically the leader in the state of North Carolina as far as dip mixes. There's a couple companies that make a few, but nothing like we do. And just a lot of the other comfort, what I call comfort food mixes that we make. There's companies, for example, that make beer bread mixes, but that's all they make. Whereas it's just one of our products. Slushy mixes, I don't know of any others in the state of North Carolina. So I feel like we have an edge or a leg up on a lot of the competition within the state of North Carolina, for example.
Yeah.
So I see how we can kind of work with that and play off of that.
Yeah, I think it really takes some sitting down and thinking about it, no different than you would the creation of a new product, right? What is this category? What are we going to call it? How are we going to kind of define it? Put ourselves in lead, put these other guys below you. But I think that that's really what caused me to look into this, is because I think many of you have companies that really aren't easily categorized. And I think John is a great example of this. When I see John's business, the mixes is one. I also see the way he delivers on the live streaming commerce, that kind of way that's being done. That to me is in a category of its own. I'm not seeing anyone else do that as an example. I think some of the others, Doug Thomas with his martial arts thing. I don't know that there's anybody in Doug's category of this kind of portable or easy to deal with. I don't know what the right attributes are, Doug, but I think you're a category king is the word he used, or category queen. And I think that's a really smart thing to think about for really all of you. And it doesn't have to be a national category, an international, like John just pointed out. It could be in North Carolina. Hell, it could be the town where you're at, right? You could be Raleigh's leading whatever, or the triangle, or whatever the right wording is. So I think that my goal in bringing this to you is really to kind of, he said that people come up with a product or a service in some cases, and then they set up a company and they go to market. But what about one more step, and that is this category? Where are you competing? How do you want the consumer's brain to categorize you? Where do you want them to, where in their mindset do you want to occupy? And as he said in the videos, this is the CEO's main job in the bigger companies is finding those shortcuts, those category shortcuts to fire the brain. Oh, this guy is the leading computer storage, or this guy, whatever the category is. But I think for all of you to spend a little bit of time defining the category that you're in and making statements about you're the first blank in this category in North Carolina or this city or hell, even in the country, whatever makes sense. I think you guys get the point. There's a couple of more videos in this series. I'm not going to go through it today, but it's just wonderful thinking, and it's very different. It's not taught anywhere that I've seen, certainly not in any university that I've been involved with. But it makes perfect sense to think about, well, what category are we in? Are we going to be the first, the guy who came up with loafers, right? The first shoe that doesn't require laces, whatever. You could argue that became a thing, right? Or his example of the minivan or even the 5-hour energy, it's all around us. And it's just a way of thinking. A lot of this stuff that we're benefiting from is the work done by many, many people with lots of money invested and lots of time in thinking through, how do you do this stuff? And I'm hopeful that what we're introducing to you and bringing up causes you to expand your thinking. It doesn't mean spend more money. It doesn't mean anything other than gaining some perspective and gaining a perspective of a bigness, I guess is the right word, or a larger perspective that gives you the ability to figure out how you might play and maybe get you out of the weeds a little bit and more at the strategic level. The guy in that video, he started off by saying, really category design is really strategy. It's really company. It's really what your company does. It's not your product. It's not your employees. It's the category that you're in and how you're competing in that category. You might be creating the category. You might be competing. You may be bringing a new solution to a category. But if you think about it from a difficulty perspective, he used the example of somebody coming up with a company that makes a better product than the category leader. And his next comment was, that's a recipe for scratching for every bit of market share that you could possibly get by making the point that you're better than the leader. It's just a really hard way to go to grow your business. Why not be in a new category and be the leader in that category and occupy the mind space of the consumers or the buyers of your products, so you don't have to fight and you don't have to constantly compare to the leader in the category. It isn't I'm better than, or we're nicer, or we're cheaper, or whatever. It gets you into a whole different realm. And we're going to be talking a little bit about understanding what game that you're playing. And some people think there's only two games. One is a finite game, which has known rules, has known players, has officials to keep it. Like football, for example, is a finite game, has a start, has a stop, has rules, officials. Everyone knows what's going to happen, what to expect. There's a winner and a loser, and that's it. Well, there's a whole nother category that business fits in, and that's the infinite game. And an infinite game is something that never ends. The game never ends. New players can come at any time. There are no real rules per se. There's no, there might be some rules, but the rules are subject to change and they can be interpreted. And I would argue that business is an infinite game. So I want you all to think with an infinite mindset instead of a finite mindset. Like, I want to get to this number of sales, or I want to get into this store, or once I do this, then everything will be better. That's not true. It isn't how it works. It's an infinite game that you're playing. And it's just a question of getting your mind around that and understanding what the levers are that you have to play in the game that you're playing. And so that's my goal with this. Some of the stuff, it may seem odd and maybe different than you expected, but my goal is to get you thinking more broadly and in a slightly different perspective. So anybody else? Anybody want to jump in here and comment?
Yeah, I'd like to say this is really kind of enlightening, because I've always known my product was kind of the only one there. So this kind of helps me put it in perspective as to a direction to take it to
Yes.
Kind of be that leader and generate those that that enthusiasm for my product.
Well, what you want to do is you want to occupy the mind space of people
Right.
who really get what you're doing, right? They get the benefit of the mobility or whatever. That's the new category. So you're the category king,
Right.
and now you got to set the rules of the category, and you got to connect with people's brains so that you don't have to spend a lot of time educating them, right? They should be able to get, aha, I get it. Yeah, so this is the category leader, and everyone else is playing a different game in a different category. So I'm glad that that's helpful. Anybody else want to jump in? Okay. All right. Well, Branson, you want to say something? Somebody
Yeah,
popped up there. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
I did that a long time ago when I first realized I was the first hip hop person to be on national TV from the area. And I started, building myself on the internet as the Eastern Carolina powerhouse of music. And it brought me a lot of attention because basically I made a category for myself. So I definitely understand what he's saying. You just have to find that niche that no one's done that you've done, and then find a way to just spread it throughout to make people use that as a new terminology.
Right. Or as the guy said, find a category and do it differently. It doesn't have to be better. It could just be different, right? So so those are good points. And so I encourage all of you, if anybody wants to talk about it, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My opinion's worth what you paid for it. So keep that in mind. But I do want to point out a couple things. This Friday at 1:00 on Pop Shop Live, John Arnold's Farmers Market. I think it's worth poking your head in there and watching this. You'll learn a lot about what's going on, what John is doing and his son Craig, that I think will be helpful. And you'll see a variety of products. You may even know some of the folks. A lot of them are North Carolina specialty food products. So just kind of keep that in mind. 1:00 Eastern on your Pop Shop Live app, which you download on your phone. So I encourage that. The other thing is tomorrow, I know a lot of you aren't familiar with this company, IDEO, but they really are unbelievable company. I can tell you a whole bunch of stories. I actually had them. I was one of their clients at one point. It is a remarkable experience. So we're going to get a chance to sit in with one of their senior guys who's going to talk about using storytelling as an entrepreneur to build your company and build your brand. I can tell you that people pay a gazillion dollars to have IDEO give them advice. So I encourage that is going to be tomorrow. And then Thursday, let me just make sure I know what I'm talking about here. Thursday, oh yeah, we're going to have a forecasting class from Tom Morse. And I encourage all of you, some of you may already do forward projections and stuff, or maybe you don't, but I promise you the stuff that you learn from Tom and very easy to do on your own. Once you see how he does it, you'll be amazed at what you can do with forecasting, kind of playing what if games without it being a heavy lift technically to get that done. So that's going to be Thursday's class. So I encourage everybody to join us for that. So that's about all I have at this point. Is there any other thoughts, comments people want to bring up? All right. Well, I'll see everybody tomorrow for Tom Kelly. All right. Bye, everybody.